like a stable world, don't we? I mean, one that's predictable, from calendars, day planners, to weather forecasting, to stock market predictions. We seem to crave predictability, and our security in some ways depends on it. But even though we have this need to be predictable and for things to be predictable, there's the unknown. There's that which cannot be relied on. There's that which we are unsure and doubtful of. In short, these are uncertain times, and they always have been uncertain. Uncertainty. Uncertainty can be one of two things in my mind, because it's an ever-present haze over anything anyway. It can be the source of anxiety and dogma, or it can be an invitation to creativity, to respond in new ways, to restructure our physical world, to turn inward and to begin to know the energy inside us and consciousness in new ways and ways of speaking about it. Welcome to the Deep End. My name is Redhawk, and my hosts and co-hosts and compatriots and co-conspirators, Marianne Rudis and Bob Hayes, want to welcome you. Uncertainty. And I want to say that part of my motive today is for us to befriend uncertainty, to bake uncertainty into the way we see as another part of this dance. We've talked about the dance between the individual and the wholeness. Well, there's also within that same dance, because it's a complex dance of consciousness, within that is this dance between predictability and what we can know and that which is uncertain. And I want us to each to seek new orders of predictability. I'm all for that, man. It's really nice to know your way, if you will. But it's also important to understand that we don't really know what we're doing. You know, today there's a struggle with truth and dogma. It seems that when I think of certainty and competence, those in my life who were most incompetent seemed most sure of themselves, and those who seemed the most competent were those who had self-doubt. I think I said that right. The incompetent are sure of themselves. The competent doubt themselves. By the way, this is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is basically people thinking they know more than they do. Of course, Donald Trump to me is like the illustration of Dunning-Kruger, which is where people don't have a sense of their own upper limit. I keep thinking, wow, do I have Dunning-Kruger? And then I think, no, every day I go to a book or somewhere to deal with something I don't know. And to be honest, I feel like I've befriended uncertainty. I feel like my cohorts have befriended uncertainty to some level. And as comfortable as predictability is, if we don't bake uncertainty into it, we won't have a decent tomorrow. So today we're talking about uncertainty and how it's ever present. Again, it's like a haze, man. It's just everywhere. And how important that is. When I say all this, Marianne, what say you in response? Or
well, I'm not real certain about what I would say. So I think I think one of the things that when we know what to expect, or we think we know what to expect, and then that doesn't happen, to rearrange your life around not knowing what's going to happen is it's hard, it's difficult. And I think I remember many years of never knowing from one day to the next what it would look like. There was a time in my life where I could not schedule out even a lunch date for a week ahead or 2 weeks ahead. And then when I got to a place where I could actually make a date 2 weeks out, and I could go, wow, this is and keep it. It was a realization that, wow, you can plan some things, but I think the point is that you can plan things, but you have to be able to go with the flow with whatever happens. And I remember when 9/11 hit, and the whole country, I think, experienced the idea that nothing is certain. Nothing is, I mean, we may have all known it on an intellectual level, but I think when that happened, we all felt it on an emotional level.
Yeah.
And we're trying to still navigate through that. So how do you live in a world that you just don't know what's around the corner? With curiosity. I think that's where curiosity is important.
And to be honest, we've lived in a very predictable time where things were stable and secure, and we are the anomaly in the world and the flow of things. Bob, how about you? Uncertainty.
Well, we've talked in past shows about cognitive dissonance and how uncomfortable it is when our ideas are challenged and we have to face the possibility that we've been wrong about something. And we fight and fight to figure out how to change the world around us to confirm what we think we know. That happens a lot in people, the way people view the news. There's a thing called confirmation bias, where you only are open to things that you already believe. And every time you get some new information that confirms what you already believe, that belief gets stronger and stronger. And that tends to stagnate oneself and the culture that you're in. But it's only from uncertainty that progress occurs, because it's when you get new ideas that forces one to reevaluate his or her worldview. And if we can get through that discomfort and embrace the new ideas, or at least give the new ideas some level of attention, then we're able to change the world.
Yeah.
And it's again, we've got this paradox that we're dealing with. We want to be comfortable, but we also want to move ahead and make things better. And it's that constant tension between the two.
And I think that's part of what we're talking about here is how do we bake uncertainty in and make these little, whether they're disappointments or whatever, look more like surprises than letdowns, if you will.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead, Mary Ann.
Well, I was going to say, what strikes me is when you're certain, you don't ask questions. And when you're uncertain, that's when you start to ask questions. And that's when you can grow and learn and open yourself up to different ideas and different ways of being. So uncertainty is not a bad thing. It's actually needed, I think, for growth.
I think, And what we're talking about here is leaving an opening. Don't close it up, because that's where, we've talked about dogma and, Bob, what you just talked about, and only letting things in that already are congruent with your beliefs, that leave an opening for something new. And let's face it, predictability right now, with everything from statistics to modeling to probabilities to algorithms to big data. When Gauss came up with the law of large numbers, which we know is statistics today, it put a huge predictability instrument into our hands in terms of, we can say in a certain city how many people will probably be killed by murder, but we can't tell which people they are. And that our predictions are pretty accurate to some degree. However, when we get lost in the prediction and forget that that the whole universe we've created to see that prediction is provisional, then we begin to see that there's other energies at play here. And I think in 1927, with Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, he showed that there were the limits to the physical world of predictability. And there's a point where you have to bake it into your worldview if you want to be real. And if you also, and I think, Bob, you said it, if we want to grow and progress and develop and become more healthy and more reflective of the wholeness of which we're a part. And this is we're at the point of dance again. And I think sometimes, and I do this too, I get too hooked into the outcome instead of the process that lets all this other stuff in, these other ways of seeing things. And as I've gotten older, I have to say I've gotten less, attached to the outcome. Of course, I don't have the kind of projects that people depended on, and so that's a little bit different. But I think that the whole concept of being open and letting it in, I think that's very hard. And Bob, you laid out some reasons why I think it's hard.
Yeah. And you mentioned Heisenberg and that whole shift in physics from the old Newtonian view that the universe was a machine and we could predict everything. If we just knew all of the different variables, we could predict with absolute certainty what the outcome would be. And then when we shifted into quantum mechanics, we found that not only is it uncertain, but the very act of us trying to observe it changes the outcome. So it makes it even more uncertain.
Well, and it gets back to the whole concept of all sense of separation is delusion. That we're all, there ain't no tar baby. We are the tar baby.
Yeah, we are the process. We're part of everything we do is part of that process. Whether we can see the ultimate ending outcome or not, it's almost irrelevant, because if we can experience the process more fully and derive joy from that process. Alan Watts has a great quote, which I'll misquote right now, but it's basically, what's the purpose of life? The purpose of life is to live. And every one of us is doing our purpose because we're living.
Yeah. Well, amen. I think that science deals with outcomes, and this is the difference between metaphysics and science to a degree, because science tries to frame things in such a way that they can predict an outcome. And I'm all for that, because they have to engage a whole lot of uncertainty to get to a specific way of even talking about what an outcome is. Metaphysics.
And to repeat it. Yeah.
And it has to be repeated. No, that's important.
Right. But another fundamental thing in science is that any outcome is just provincial, because
Bingo.
The more we learn about it, the less certain we are about that outcome.
That's
and
right.
It's a continuous cycle.
And it also motivates us. I think of uncertainty, and as a Moody Blues freak, I just love Justin Hayward when he talks about his favorite thing is an uncertain future, because it just makes it malleable. I think uncertainty is like Rumpelstiltskin's spinning wheel. It can take dross and turn it into gold. And I think that's what science does. I think of what we've done with DNA and decoding and encoding, and the vaccines we've gotten over the last year so quickly, completely come directly out of that. What is this? I go back to the Jesuit Pierre Desjardins and his predicting DNA and the uncertainty that was surrounding that, and that they were exploring. They had to find new ways of looking at things, and that's one of the best things that science does. It's looking for an outcome, but it's also looking for something more. And if you want to see that, you can see the uncertainty and the modeling around weather and climate. It's amazing because we've uncovered climate change through a whole series of different modelings and predictability studies and asymmetrical math systems. It's quite amazing. And now we have to come up with a response to that. We have to uncover the sources of many of the things. We were uncertain of so many of the causes until they started feeding back on us. And now we know that we were creating these. So uncertainty, I think when you bake it into your life, you also have to fan the fires of creativity because we have to find new ways of responding.
Yeah, I think, and that's why dogma is so dangerous, because it freezes us. And when we become afraid of that uncertainty, that's when we latch on to things, to dogmatic ideas and dogmatic ways of thinking. And it happens in religion, it happens in science, it happens everywhere. And so to open ourselves and to not, and I guess it would take a bit of bravery to live with uncertainty. And it would be, a little bit of hope and maybe love, or, to counteract that fear, because when we're afraid, we want to hold on. We want to hold on to something we know and something that is going to save us and keep us safe. And when that's gone, it is a different way of living, but it doesn't have to be a fearful way of living. It can be a curious way to live. It can be an open way to live. It can be a growing way to live. So,
and it doesn't have to be totally one or the other. You can have a stable life and still embrace certain aspects of uncertainty, and look for new approaches. And while you're safely ensconced in whatever theories or whatever beliefs you have at the time, as long as you're open enough to let in a little bit of new light, then you can use that to then restructure and take that step forward.
Well, and build, right?
And build. And, dogma is a hard thing to pierce because it is a protective piece. People... many folks don't want to be vulnerable. Heck, I don't want to be vulnerable. I think half of our fascination with superheroes is the dance between their superpower and their vulnerability, and how Superman, they had a problem with Superman because he was so invulnerable. They had to introduce kryptonite, and that's become a metaphor. Everybody has their own kryptonite. Everybody has this weak spot, and we've talked about that, the little room of forever nothing in each of us that is so anxiety-inducing. And I'll be honest, uncertainty is anxiety-inducing. To me, 724 News is a look at one of the growing edges of uncertainty. Look what's happening in between Russia and
Ukraine.
I was thinking Uruguay. Man, I'm getting old man thought here. It's unbelievable that this is happening in our time, based on my life of stability and the world order that I've lived in.
But see, Putin was very certain that he was going to be able to roll into Ukraine and in a very short amount of time dislodged the government and put his own puppet government in there. What has happened is that the Ukrainians are resisting more so than he had any idea they would. And it's changed the whole dynamic of what's going on over there. And even if he kicks out the government and so forth, it's never going to be what he thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Well, there again,
and that's just uncertainty coming up and kicking him in the butt.
Well, and changing outcomes, right? I mean, you have a particular outcome in mind, and that very rarely does that happen.
and this brings a new order of uncertainty. For instance, the algorithm in artificial intelligence that's applied in Facebook, it claims to know me, and in some places it really does. Although I throw it curves all the time, I haven't had a cat in almost 20 years, and I'm still getting kitty litter commercials because every once in a while I'll just go on there and type kitty litter or something in there just to see what the algorithm does with it. And when I was in the 8th grade, and I've shared this before, I took a test that told me my best thing would to be a social worker or a minister. And I remember sharing with you all that I laughed at that. And yet, I just came off of 40 years as a minister, so there's a predictability that I don't particularly like when it's applied to me. And yet, a society needs a certain amount of predictability, a pattern that allows it to function and for its systems to be all up and running and working with each other. And I think that's part of the uncertainty of our time, is we're now, and if you go back to the podcast on paradigm shift between my individual content and the context in which I'm a part of, we're moving from my individual place to a contextual, systemic place that I have to see myself within a system in order to understand who I am, how I am, and all that. And we're moving to a new order of uncertainty in terms of global perception and in terms of human response, because I think, again, we've talked about moving into the fourth chakra and the heart of the world opening. I think this is what Putin misinterpreted in his certainty, is that there's another dimension to things that cannot be predicted. I've called it quantum tunneling. There's a whole lot of different ways you can look at it. The gods of random sync are gathering and conspiring for something new. I mean, I was amazed that in the last 3 days, and this is trite, but the top 16 NCAA basketball teams all lost in the same two days. What the hell? There's an uncertainty, something that is non-predictable and we cannot rely on, that is active within the realities that we are all part of. And we can create provisional universes where everything is predictable and in place, but they're provisional. And everybody I know who has done that later in life, it came back and bit them really good.
Yeah. Well, it's that uncertainty that makes sports so popular.
Yeah.
You can be on the edge of your seat to the very end, and you don't know how it's going to come out. And, even something that's as structured as a play, where they have lines that have to be delivered in a certain way at a certain time and so forth, we can see the difference in energy between a recorded play and a live play, because that live play is occurring in a context that something can happen, something unexpected can happen, and it makes us all more attentive to it, and we feel the energy that's being generated there by that uncertainty.
Well, and something always does happen differently, because I don't think anything ever happens the same way twice. I know people that are actors that do plays, and every performance is unique. Even though they're saying the same lines or they're doing the same thing, you have audience reactions, you have all these other things that play into it, being part of this bigger system. And it's unpredictable is, I think what my mind keeps going to is the idea of change and how everything is always changing. And sometimes we want to resist that. And so that's when we put in those things that make things certain. I get up at the same time every day. I always make a cup of coffee. I have my routines. I have these things that I can do to keep my life ordered, knowing at the same time that anything can happen at any minute. And as we change and grow, I think how we handle this changing is really important.
And that's a great segue to what I want to round out this podcast with, because one of my favorite Moody Blues songs is "The Eyes of a Child," and I really believe that we all need that. What did Jesus say as he put the child on his knee? If you don't see the way this kid sees, you'll never get into heaven. Buddha talks about beginner's mind. Looking at everything as new, all of a sudden uncertainty is not this surprise thing, although it will still have that. It's something else. And Marianne, you used the word curiosity. What it does is it fuels our curiosity when we start living with the eyes of a child or a beginner's mind. It is a way to receive reality and embrace it, and at the same time leave an opening for the next embrace, which I think is I think, Bob, you used the word process, and Marianne did too, that it's really about how do we live out the fullness of the process that is my being, life, and consciousness in such a way that it reflects what is best, most healthy, and good. And to me, the idea of a beginner's mind and eyes of a child is a poetic way into living in that place.
Yeah. Agreed.
That's totally the Zen perspective. Everything is new every time you experience it, and it's scary, but it's also invigorating, and it's something that can be a huge motivation if you allow yourself to be open and to go with the process of change.
And
well, even us, we're new in every minute. Every experience that we have changes us, and we become a new entity or a new person or a new perspective. It's always happening.
And what we call the self, this gets back to a lot of our podcast, is really the continuity of that process and journey. And that self, that's why I think when Jung talks about the self-selfing, just like an apple tree makes apples, what is the self doing? It's creating more selves. It's creating more understanding, justification, and everything else, seeking security in maintaining that organism, the organism of you. And we're the most complex one on the planet. Other animals don't think about uncertainty. That doesn't mean uncertainty doesn't happen, because it happens all the time, especially in the times when natural habitats are being destroyed. That there is something happening in consciousness that lets us dance at the breaking edge, where the predictable and the unpredictable are coming together in a way that is, I don't know, man. It's definitely flummoxed my ass.
Well, I think you're describing adaptability and resilience right there. It's kind of like you have to adapt to whatever the environment.
You just can't cling to your old ways. You have to be able to let go.
Well, you can, but you'll suffer.
Yeah. So
Exactly.
that's a good segue to our final comments. Bob, final comment?
Well, I just think that, again, if we recognize that we can't stop change, we can't avoid uncertainty, and we can be open to it in a healthy way, not abandon everything that we think we know, but just be open to new ways of looking at things, then we can feel a lot better about the uncertain world.
Amen. Marianne, final comments?
Well, I think at least for me, when I recognize that what I don't know far outweighs what I do know, and I live my life in a way that there are things that I just don't know yet, and open myself up to try to learn that without that, without having to defend myself for not knowing something. Because I think that's part of it too. There's these defense mechanisms that we put into place where it's like, oh, well, I should know that, but I don't. And so just to be curious or be challenged.
Amen.
Challenge yourself.
And I think that that's part of you've brought it up a couple times, Marianne. It's about shame and pain. If we don't own stuff, we create our own backwash of suffering. Now, someone asked me one time what I thought the reason for suffering, and I said the only thing I can see the reason for suffering is to put an end to it. We suffer. And as I get old, I'm learning the difference between pain and suffering. Getting old really hurts, at least it is in my universe. However, I don't feel like I'm suffering. There's been a few moments where I was mamby-pamby suffer, but mostly it's an amazing thing. What is this suffering? Why do we have to suffer? What's the deal with that? Is that the only way we can get the feedback we need in order to change? And I don't know about you, but a lot of my suffering has nothing to do with change. It's just life doing what it does. Whether it's disease or pestilence or being cruel to each other or war, what is it that drives us, that makes suffering so important in our world? I don't know. But it's important in this great metaphysic we're trying to dance in to at least address it. Until then, my friends, God's peace, and may the presence of the oneness of being be with you in all ways.